everybody, and welcome back to the Hilltop Pillbox here in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada. And today we are going to be playing a game of 1942 Second Edition, Axis and Allies. This is responding to a request someone made recently a couple of times. So I thought, what the heck, we'll crack this one open. We're going to play ourselves a solo game. I'm not as well versed at this one as I am at Anniversary, and on the face of it, it really looks like the Axis have an advantage here. But I will have to play the game to find out and see how things go. But, yeah, it just looks really kind of bleak for Russia right off the bat. So I will do my due diligence, though, and make sure that I follow all the rules as best as I can. I have the rule book in front of me here, and just make sure everything goes well. Looks as though the Soviets do get to go first, because it is a 5-faction game. So it'll be the Soviets, then the Germans, then the Brits, then the Japanese, then the US, and then back to the Soviets. And it's a good thing the Soviets go first, because if they didn't, I think Moscow might fall in round one, which I guess obviously is a thing you can't have happen. So, wish me luck as we plow through this game. And I usually put out a strategy and say, oh, I'm going to try this and see, but I don't know the game well enough to know if I can really do that. So we're going to do a couple of rounds here, see what we see, and then see if some sort of a grand strategy will emerge. I mean, it's always a good idea to pressure the Soviets and chip away at their economy, at the same time being a threat to any Anglo-American landings. Not sure if Germany has the money for that, though. I think they... What do they start at? 40 bucks? We'll see. I think they're going to be losing a lot in the first round, but we'll see. Alright, Soviets get to go first. Let's see what Comrade Stalin does with these many people. Headed for round two, and we're going to take a look at what we see here. Some pretty cautious play on both sides here in the Pacific. The Japanese decided to coagulate their fleets over here in the Western Pacific, so they didn't strike out at the Americans. It would have been a pretty hefty butcher's bill, I think, had they tried. And the British brought their fleet up from Australia here, didn't bring anything on it, because they thought, if it had a man or a couple of men or something on it, I might have taken a shot with some of my Japanese stuff. But it didn't, so figured it really wasn't worth hanging part of the Imperial Japanese Navy out to dry. Over here, the British took their guy out of Burma, and of course the Japanese walked in. The Japanese attacked the 2 men in Yunnan with man artillery and 4 planes. They got their hits, but the Americans got 2 hits as well, which absolutely stopped them cold. I figured it wasn't worth a buck to lose a plane. Anhui, pretty successful attack by the Japanese, lost 1 man. Baracha, the 5 Soviet soldiers are now gone, pushing up the daisies as it were, but they took a few Japanese infantry off the board in so doing. On the Eastern Front, things are not going well for the Soviets. They actually did very well in Karelia. I sent every German plane that could make it, except for the bomber, which we'll talk about in a second, up to Karelia. So they had 6 fighters. They had 1 tank and 9 men. First round, 1 hit. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Hilltop's dice have reared their ugly head, and I hope they don't continue on through the weekend up at the Sky Marshal Cup. So yeah, it allowed the Soviets to chip away at the Germans. The Germans ended up losing 8 infantry to the Soviets, 6 infantry and 2 artillery, I think. So fairly balanced on the face of it, but it should not have lasted that long at all. West Russia was taken by the Soviets and then taken back by the Germans. Ukraine is pretty empty right now, and a big stack of stuff in the Caucasus, but as you can see, Russia is very thinly occupied, and I brought up the Chinese fighter, but you know what? It just struck me as to maybe in this version you're not allowed to move the Chinese fighter that way. So I'm going to take a look, and here are the American Chinese troops that were in Sichuan have moved up to Kazakhstan, or is Kazakhstan? Yeah, the Kazakh state, Kazakh SSR, Soviet Socialist Republic. So I'm going to have to take a look at the rules and see if that's all right. In Africa, the Germans came and took Egypt, and the British got some good hits, got 3 hits, so they only had a tank left, and the British landed 2 infantry from Transjordan and Persia, courtesy of the transport that was by India, and took back Egypt. So the Germans will likely come down here and try to take it back. Germany doesn't like getting mired in Africa, but you also don't want to give up the opportunity of pushing through to India or the Soviet Union from a different direction. Up here, this was very interesting. They sent up a destroyer and 2 fighters and a bomber to kill 3 subs. And on the first round, the British got 2 hits, and the German subs, 3 ones. Yeah, well, even 1-1 would have ended the battle because subs can only hit ships, so that would have killed the destroyer. But no, they got 3. And so that left 1 German sub alive and well in the sea zone, and then I built a destroyer there. But I think this transport here is likely going to die. I just wanted to get that tank a little bit closer and possibly be able to threaten Norway directly than from being in eastern Canada. So whether or not that actually comes to pass, who knows? I did build up the Kriegsmarine to the tune of 2 destroyers, wanting to stay relevant, thinking that I'd lose all the subs, but there you have it, pardon me. Not much going on here. Thought I'd bulk up, build a bunch of men as well, just to throw them into France before the Allied landings begin in earnest. Speaking of earnest, the Americans are going to kill Germany first. And they definitely have lots of steel in the water now. We've got 4 destroyers and a loaded carrier and a cruiser, and 2 transports with enough stuff to make a landing, possibly a torch, but we shall see what we see on round 2. But the Soviets have got to do a little bit of pushing here. Might have to try to get rid of these 2 units that are left in Karelia. Don't want the Germans building a couple of tanks every turn right on your doorstep, pardon me. Unfortunately, as you can see, the only thing that can attack them at this point is fighters. So I just noticed there that unlike Anniversary, you can't get to Karelia very simply. So yeah, we're going to have to let the Germans have it for 1 round, and maybe we'll have to demonstrate down south here to keep the Germans honest a little bit. All right, round 2 coming up. Already looking kind of bad for the Allies, but lots of dice to be rolled. Stay tuned. Okay, headed for round 3, and some minorly interesting things happening. We'll tell you all about it here. We're going to start in the Pacific, of course. Americans did not move. They kept the fleet out here, projecting a little bit of power. Japanese building a couple of subs here and gathering a tidy little fleet up here in the Japanese home waters. The British moved north off the coast of America and headed up here possibly to pick up a boy from Canada. See what happens with all that. Japanese built 3 tanks here, as they are wont to do, and took over some more Soviet territory. The Soviets are down to $20. All of China has been taken, annexed, if you will, by the Japanese in the greater Asian prosperity sphere or something. Asia for the Asiatics, as long as those Asiatics are Japanese, I guess. All right, heading down to India. India building a couple of artillery and a man. Got some tanks last turn. And a lot of Japanese hardware here with some bombards. Don't know if there's enough to take out what's here. Plus, the British get to build first. So, see what we see. The Japanese might go along and pilfer some of their infantry from the islands to bring them up for an invasion. Over here in Africa, the British landed 2 infantry that both died on the first round, but they did kill 1 German infantry. And the Germans have nothing to bring over to Egypt on this turn, so the British might be able to grab it. But this is also looking kind of iffy. The Americans have landed 4 units coming down here, and a decent navy here, of course. I think I said 4 destroyers. Last turn is 3 destroyers and a cruiser and a loaded carrier, so enough defense. The Americans, the mighty 8th, got involved and bombed Germany for 6, so that was fairly helpful. And of course, the Soviets, unable to get to Karelia, didn't actually try. They did, however, fight to retain control of West Russia from the Germans, who came in with 2 units, and they killed them both on the first round. And again, Germany then would retreat from that and not push their luck in losing a plane and keeping one guy there, because the Soviets do have a lot of boots on the ground now. But now that they're down to $20, it's going to be difficult for them to mount any sort of offensive strikes at this point in the game. So that didn't take long. We're just headed to round 3, and they're already down to building 6 units a turn. And that's for this turn. Next turn it'll be fewer. The Americans, continuing to want to put pressure on the Germans, have brought over, or are about to bring over 4 more units, including some armor. So right now, Italy is under threat by the Americans. France is under threat, of course, by the Americans, because they do have bombards. Well, 1 bombard, they got a couple of fighters, and they've got the bomber. So it's tough to know where are we going to send our German stuff. Plus, they got to repair the $6 here. And Germany right now sitting at $42 of income. Well, the Americans, the Chinese, the Leathernecks, and the Chinese troops here were able to actually come on over. There's nothing in the rulebook I found that said that Chiang Kai-shek couldn't take up residence in Stalingrad. So there you have it. And I don't know, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anything written specifically about China, because China, of course, is not a playable power here, so I guess they can go wherever they want. All right, round 3 coming up. It'll be interesting. It's definitely a lot of German armor here, lots of air power. Likely could take the Caucasus this turn, and yeah, it will be interesting. All right, stay tuned. Round 3 coming up. Round 3 is done, and the fun continues here in the Pacific. The Japanese building up closer to home now. Got their 3 tanks on the mainland. That's bad news for the Soviets, of course. Americans didn't move the fleet here. I was halfway considering moving them up to 58 to start to threaten the Japanese homeland, along with the British fleet would move there. But unfortunately, there's just too much Japanese stuff here, and that would force the Americans to spend a lot of money in the Pacific just to stay relevant, which they don't want to do. Down here, the British made a spoiling attack versus Burma and were able to wipe out quite a bit of stuff. And the Japanese have now reinforced with 5 infantry. They were able to bring in some from China directly and others on the boats. You can see that the Money Islands are now vacant. So, Japan is going all in, trying to go after India, but it's not looking real doable yet. But give it a moment. They've got another 3 tanks here. I can swing around to Persia and cause some grief. Up here, of course, the Japanese are gobbling up the Soviet economy. Soviets are down to 11 now. Not looking real good. Actually, they're lower than 11. I didn't adjust after some other stuff happened here. So they have 8. Oh, no, it is 11. I thought for some reason Moscow was 6. All right, so they do have 11, but that is it. And they're sitting on slightly more than that, like 14 or something. So they're not doing really well for money. The Germans, building in Karelia a little bit, took West Russia, took the Caucasus, and are now going to be able to build right at the gates of Moscow. So the Soviets will have to probably hunker in the bunker and hope for some salvation. Over here, the Americans have landed some more and moved across into Algeria, but really not a concern to the Germans at this point. although the Americans do have enough to push through into Libya and threaten something on the mainland this turn. Speaking of threatening the mainland, the British built 3 transports this last round, and it is a tempting target for the Kriegsmarine. They've got a couple destroyers and a cruiser and a couple of bombers that can make it to take out essentially the only threat to their western front that the British have been able to muster. So that's likely going to be a shot that they will take. Americans built a battle wagon and some more dudes over here, artillery, ready to continue the landings. Don't quite have a shuck going yet. I don't consider 2 transports on each side of the Atlantic to be a shuck. You need to be about 4 or 5 to really make it something worth the headlines. The British fleet from India has escaped down here to the south. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do with them, but they'll probably head up, and if they can, they'll try to make a difference up north. All right, so that is all we have for round 3. This game is moving on very, very quickly. Round 4 coming up, and I mean, Moscow could fall this turn. The battle for the Caucasus was not a simple thing, actually. You can see the Germans have no infantry support left at all down here. And they did lose 3 planes to the anti-aircraft gun. Yes, 3 ones were rolled out of 7 dice. And I thought, ooh, they might have a chance. But just too much stuff, too much firepower. Okay, on to round 4. Things are looking bleak right now for the Allies. They're going to have to really start doing some damage here. Bombing run, of course, only yielded a damage of 2 this time by the Mighty 8th. I guess they were bombing at night for a change, which I don't think they did too much. All right, on to round 4. Can the Axis Juggernaut be stopped? All right, heading to round 5, and yeah, still looking a little bleak for the Allies, but perhaps a little bit of hope. We'll get into that in a moment. We got the British fleet, the remnants of the Pacific Fleet up here, and are just trying not to die. Japanese, again, built their tanks and a couple of men at home. Americans remained here. Again, it's a projection of power thing. If they went back to San Fran, then the Japanese might go have their way elsewhere, but it's keeping the bulk of the Japanese fleet a little closer to home than they probably would like to be. Down here in Southeast Asia, they're both building up a bit. The Japanese now have the 2 factories on the mainland, so they're able to build up a little quicker, but it is draining a lot of resources, and the British have made use of some spoiling attacks and have done quite well. The Americans are helping out the British as well. Lone Tank did a bit of a fool's errand into Egypt, but survived and killed the lone German infantry that was standing there, so it's an extra $2 for the British next turn. And I know it wasn't really the Bismarck, but the Bismarck is gone. 2 destroyers and 2 fighters from the carrier came in and dispatched it without loss, so that was pretty handy for them. A couple more boatloads of units have arrived over here, along with a new destroyer and battleship. And now we can build transports unabated over here. The German fleet up here died, but it did take care of the British transports, cruiser and destroyer. And they lost a cruiser and a destroyer out of that gambit. I don't know if it's a gambit. We're in round 4 for that. But anyway, the Americans have landed 2 boatloads of guys up here from Africa. They came up and are now threatening Norway. Possibly a landing up here if the Germans take a poke at Moscow, which they very well might do. We do have now quite a number of tanks next door to Moscow, and not much that the Russians can do. They could plant a guy here and take out Archangel to stop that stack of 6 tanks from coming in. Might have to do that. But the Japanese here have 7 tanks and 5 other ground units ready to attack as well. So Moscow right now, they have $13, so that'll be 4 men, maybe 3 men and an artillery, just so they don't leave any extra money left over for the Germans. should the attack go well. But the Germans definitely have to take a poke this turn, and that will, that will tell us a lot about how this game is going to go. So it's a faster playing game. Again, I'm not used to this one as much as I am with all the other versions, but it seems to be one that you can sit down and play with your friends in 3 to 5 hours. And well, what does the box say for time? It says, doesn't say anything there. I'll look later. I'll let you know what it says. But seems to be a good little game this way, and I am enjoying it. There are some things that kind of appear in the middle of my turn. I go, oh, I should have done that. Oh, I forgot to do this. Oh, right. So it is pretty interesting that way. I think the biggest difference for me, honestly, is Italy not being a playable nation and China not being a playable nation. So these few units that are in here to start the game, in my mind, are absolutely doomed. Japanese will just come and take all this stuff. And with the Japanese beginning with the Money Islands, it's very tough to do anything against the Japanese to any great extent. All right, on we go to turn 5. We'll find out if Moscow survives. Oh, we got to make sure that we get Vologda onto the Japanese. I'm pretty sure I took the money, but we'll do the math. Okay, Moscow bound. Who's going to be raising the flag? Well, in what could be arguably the busiest round 5 that I have ever seen. I mean, I haven't played this game that often, but of any game, we're gonna walk you through it here. So the British did land up in the Soviet Far East to help the Soviets' economy a little bit and hurt the Japanese. And successful landing, but then they lost their fleet to 3 subs and 2 fighters. So, but we knew it wasn't long for this world. And the Americans stayed back in Pearl Harbor. Again, just too much stuff over here. If they head up there, they'd probably lose it all. And again, I don't want to start spending American money in the Pacific. Over here, this was weird. So the British did a spoiling attack on Burma and ended up destroying everything the Japanese had, and they still had 5 tanks remaining. So the Japanese took their 2 tanks and 2 fighters and 2 bombards and got 5 hits and destroyed them all, and the British hit twice, so they killed the 2 tanks. So Britain remains in control, but the Japanese didn't lose any fighters over that. But they did lose a couple fighters in their bomber in Burma on the British spoiling attack. But as you can see, both sides are really thinned out down here now. But the Japanese do have reinforcements coming, so still an uphill battle for the British. In the Middle East, the Americans were able to punch through to Transjordan, a little tank division that could. It's got to be Patton, right? Third Army. But what happened in Moscow, I hear you asking. Well, here we go. Yeah, it fell. But it didn't fall to the Germans. The Russians held firm. They did their little spoiling attacks here to stop these German tanks from coming through. And we just attacked from the south. And then the Japanese finished them off. But the Russians did some pretty good damage. Killed a lot of Axis units in the defense of Moscow. Well, I said this was a weird turn because down here, the Americans, they landed in the Balkans. Had some success there, scooping a couple of bucks. But this is the story. Look at that. Yes, the Americans landed in Berlin and won. And the Germans rolled absolutely horribly. For me, it was one of those, if we don't do it now, we'll never be able to. So I gave it a whirl. We only had 4 ground units, but we had a cruiser bombard. We had 2 fighters and the bomber from England. And so they came in here and on the first round got, I want to say 6 or 7 hits. Just shredded the German defenses, and the Germans did not roll real well. Ended up getting 4 hits in the 2 rounds of combat. So it didn't roll real well considering they had fighters and tanks in there. So Germany's broke. Russia's broke. The Americans and the Japanese have the lion's share of the money on the table right now. and the British have about 30 bucks. They're back to par. But this game just turned on a dime, like just absolutely turned right around. Now, the Soviets are going to come, or pardon me, the Germans are going to come back. They're going to take Moscow back. They're going to get rid of these Americans, but they might even wait a turn to do that. They're definitely going to take Berlin back, and there's nothing here for the Allies to come with. They've got another 4 units, of course, but they're probably not going to be able to take over everything that the Germans can bring in there. The Japanese are going to clean up the remainder up here, and the Germans will help out with that, I'm sure, but these tanks are headed back to Berlin, obviously. Most of them. Down here, the Japanese, I was thinking of bringing the Japanese stack of tanks from Moscow down to here, and then put the herd on India, which they could very well do. Now, is Germany without money for one turn and giving all of their money to Americans a real... Is it going to wreck everything? Is it going to change the whole game? Or is it just a minor delay at this point, knowing that the Japanese are doing quite well here, have a pretty healthy economy, and have a lock on Moscow? We will find out, but this is one of those games that you just can't seem to tell what's going to happen. The Americans have to keep the pressure on over here. If America takes its foot off the gas and tries to get Britain to just do all the heavy lifting, well, Calcutta's going to die, and the Germans are going to end up eventually putting pressure on London. So we got to keep the pressure on. I think taking Berlin was a one-time deal. If they do take it again, that'll probably signify the end of the game. Things like Norway and Finland might be going away at this time, and well, we'll see. But the Japanese can now build in Moscow, so yeah. Well, we will see what happens. Turn 6. Will Calcutta fall this turn? Will it take another turn? Probably another turn, because they get to build before the Japanese, and those 3 tanks are too far away. All right, stay tuned. Round 7 coming up. Well, they say lightning never strikes twice, but let's take a look and see what our game has to say about that. The Japanese, as you can see, came up here and landed, and they brought their whole fleet with them, and the Americans said, well, we got to attack that. And attack they did, and they won, and they won big. The battleship had a hit, but they repair, as we know in this version. So, the Japanese home fleet is now home to fish and other Pacific Sea creatures. They are trying to get back some of the Soviet money that they lost from the British, and built a lone destroyer at home, along with a man and a bomber, hoping to do something with all that. There's no American transports within range of Tokyo, so they have a little bit of grace period. But the Japanese did build down here and coagulate down here some of their forces, and hoping to go after Calcutta again. A little bit of help from the Germans coming down here. We'll see if they're going to be able to maybe do a bit of an attack. Not many of them, there's only 4, but hey, every little bit helps, I guess. And up here, the Japanese built some men and some tanks, and the other big stack of tanks came over here in order to help Berlin should it fall. And there's that lightning striking twice, and this time it fell even easier. I shouldn't say that, because the British attacked with 4 ground units and a fighter, and they lost them all in the first round to the, I think there were 7 tanks, but they were able to get 3 hits. So that meant that the Americans only had 4 tanks, and the Germans did do an attack from Italy into here, knocked them down to 2 artillery. They got 1 hit for 4 straight rounds, and the Americans were firing back and didn't get too many hits, got 3 hits, I think, overall. But that wasn't enough to save Berlin, so the Germans once again have no money to spend, and they are down to 4 units there and 6 units, 7 if you include the AA gun. So things are not looking great. There are 6 more Americans here ready to come across, and another 12 units that just got built thanks to the big bonanza of money from the Germans. Also, the Brits have another 4 units here that they can bring across. So not a huge landing, but still 4 more units that could land, and there is a cruiser bombard. No air power though, and I don't think the bomber can make it to Berlin and land safely. Let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, no. So that's unfortunate if Britain wanted to try an attack to get back Berlin. But the Germans have to take it in the first place. Now, they do have 2 tanks that can make it and 6 infantry. So that's 8 units versus 4. 6 1s and 2 3s versus 4 2s. Well, that's, what's that, 12 pips to 8. So that's likely a German victory. But again, these dice have been absolutely weird today. Soviets remain, but obviously just doing all this stuff to try to cut back on the Japanese influence in their territory, but these guys are likely going to die in the next round. If the Germans don't take back Berlin, that's probably not the end of it. The British will be able to land 4 more units here, of course, but there is a good stack of Japanese armor here that will likely be able to take it back. But the Americans have a lone tank here. That's all they have that can land in Germany at this time. But France will likely be vacated, so these 6 units will likely land in France, and then we can get our shuck going in earnest. So, wow, tale of 2 games. It really looked good for the Axis, but some good dice at the right time, especially in a couple of capital fights. Made all the difference here. But not over yet. Still interested to see what happens down here. I think the Brits are actually happy to give up Calcutta if they can lock down Berlin. Because if they can lock down Berlin, we'll probably call the game at that point. Because then it's just kind of a waste of time at that point. Especially with the Japanese home fleet being eradicated. And the Americans now are going to be able to build up a transport fleet here once the Germans have been subdued. Alright, round 7 coming up. What's Berlin going to look like? Well, some exciting turns of events here in round 7. And, well, we'll show you what we show you. So, Japanese flew a bomber over to kill the lone American transport that I left here by accident. Didn't do the math. And flew up to Alaska, but now it's kind of in harm's way, so it'll probably be flying home. Japanese built a battleship and a couple was 2 destroyers and a sub up here. They went full Navy this round, except for a couple of tanks down here. The standoff continues, and the longer this goes, probably the more it favors the British, because, well, you'll find out in a minute here. The Germans did not do a spoiling attack. I figured that'd be throwing away 4 infantry that could be useful elsewhere, so they came over to Transjordan. Try to help the German cause in the Middle East. Japanese continue to hold power all throughout here. They wiped out the last remnants of the Soviet war machine. The British landed in Norway, and the German infantry that moved across from Norway is staying in Finland for the time being, although now the Brits and the Americans could just do landings up and around, so they might retreat back to Karelia. Yes, the Germans attacked the Americans that were in there and lost. But they wiped them all out. There was nothing left. So then the British landed 4 infantry, and the 6 Japanese tanks from Belarusia came in and defeated them on 1 round of combat. And it's probably pretty good too, because the British infantry and artillery got 4, or it was just infantry, pardon me. They got 3 out of 4 hits. So only 3 Japanese tanks there, and as you can see, lots of American equipment in and around Southern Europe, and another 12 units here. Oh, yeah, and ready to go. And France has fallen, of course, 6 units there. So we're going to play one more round. It's pretty much over, though, because Germany has no money. They'll collect some money here and then hand it directly over to either Britain or America. The British do have enough units to load up all 3 transports. They had brought the tank over from Greenland. Remember him? Went over there? long time ago. Yeah, they went and picked them up and dropped them off in Norway. All right. So now, this is what we have going on. Japanese have 3 tanks in Berlin, and then there's 2 German infantry there, 4 German infantry here, and scads of Allied stuff ready to pounce. Over here, the standoff just doesn't seem like Calcutta's all that important anymore. If Berlin falls again and stays fallen this turn, we will likely call it, especially if the British are able to go in there and dismantle the Japanese. Because if the British land here with the ability to build next round, there's nothing that can really get into range by then to do any sort of a counterattack. And then of course they can build 10 units there. This is, it's an older game, so it doesn't have those restrictions on building, and the complexes don't die. So, but that's where this game is very interesting to me. I can see why going for the throat is very, very effective, and all the niceties of kind of trimming the branches might not be the best idea in some cases. Just go for the throat. So we're going to play one more round here. We'll see what we see. I suspect all this build-up from the Pacific is going to be threatening Tokyo directly very shortly. Now, the Japanese still have a very healthy economy. There's still more money going into Japan than there is into America. But the Japanese have maxed out. They really don't have anywhere else they can get money except in Calcutta. So we'll see what we see on this round. Round 8, likely the last round, but who knows? Stay tuned. Alright, looks like this game is over. The British came in and they landed 6 units and are remaining with 3. But what we're going to do here, I've already done the Japanese movements around, trying to get them anywhere they can go. I didn't put on a Japanese build yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to do one attack here, and if they don't take Calcutta, definitely the end of the game. I think it's the end of the game anyway. But if they do take Calcutta, I might do one more round. So we're just going to line up this battle. Whole bunch of 2s. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Got a bomber, got anti-aircraft, and 3 fighters. And we're just going to have them dropping off a couple of tanks, so all this stuff will be in there. So we're going to have all these tanks. We're going to have 3 of those. Obviously the carrier does not factor in. So we're going to start with 2 AA shots. Alright, nothing there. And then the Japanese will have 2 bombards. That's kind of how it's been going for the Axis today. And now they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So they've got 10 at 3. The first round is very telling. And we will be able to tell very shortly. These are the dice that Triple Crown made for me. Gave you 2 sets of these. Fantastic. Alright, here we go. The attack on Calcutta. That is a very good first round. So that's 7 hits. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Alright. So we're going to... Oh, wait a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Did that. Forgot about the cheap stuff. And since this is an all or nothing, we'll get rid of the bomber right now. Okay, so that is 7 hits out of a possible 12 dice, including the bombards. So that's pretty good. Punching a little bit above the bubble. And we've got 1 at 1 with the bomber. So there goes a Japanese tank to a bomber. And now we've got 3 at 2. And 1 more hit. And now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we got 8 at 3. Ouch. That's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if these 3 fighters all get hits, that is it for the Japanese. 2. Well, we're just going to kill the fighters, because if we want to take Calcutta, because if we don't take Calcutta, There's nothing for it. So we just have one tank for the Japanese, get a hit on the way out. And we're going to start with the fighters here. Well, all they needed was the one. So we're going to call it, folks, because at the end of the day, this is what we have left in Calcutta. And there's nothing left down here. I placed 2 tanks here. And placed 4 tanks here. I would give 6 that could attack, but these ones wouldn't be able to because the British would definitely block there and block there. So they could attack with 2 plus bombards. And the British will be building more stuff in there. So that's just going to be a bottomless hole for the Japanese. Meanwhile, they're not relieving any pressure here in Europe. So because of that attack, then the Americans would definitely move their boys in here. Probably move one guy in northwestern Europe just to snipe that money. This tank would go on a little bit of a roam. Yeah, we'd probably go over there and block the Japanese tanks from zipping through too much. So that'd be an extra $4 for the Americans. The British took the German money, which was 28, and added it to their coffers, and they themselves got $39 this round. So do the math on that, $67. Bunch of American stuff landing. I'd probably actually bring them over here at this point and then just shut this noise down. Probably kill these Germans on the way through because they've closed the Suez, which is a nasty spot of business. All right, well, thanks so much for watching, folks. You know, it would have been nice to play this a little longer, but man, I mean, you saw the dice. You saw those 2 4s I rolled and blanks. So that kind of happened to the Axis at a couple of key moments. Even with the Soviet Union gone, though, the Allies were able to do some good. And I think that killed Germany first in this works really, really well if you can keep the navies going. All right, thanks so much for watching, folks. Have yourselves a great day, and as we always say here, hug your loved ones, thank your friends for playing, and as always, may the dice be with you.